Welcome to Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear, where integrative oncology meets holistic healing. This podcast is your home for the latest in innovation, exploration, and elevation in all areas of integrative oncology, medicine, health, wellness, and beyond. Join me and a host of other innovators as we go from practicing to prescribing. Your daily dose of wellness begins now. Shock the tumor. Awaken the immune system. Another hot take by Dr. Nathan Goodyear. Here we're talking specifically about the combination of intratumoral PEF, pulse electric field therapy, to augment chemo-immunotherapy. Now, this article was published in 2024 entitled Neoadjuvant Chemo-Immunotherapy is Improved with a Novel Pulse Electric Field Technology in an Immune Cold Murine Model. So here again, I'm talking about PEF, but primarily not as an ablative technique, but actually as an immunomodulatory therapy. So we think about ablation, we think destruction, but here it's the partial destruction. And in the process of that, with this pulse electric field therapy, what you're generating is you're actually generating the ability to make a non-immune responsive tumor, a cold tumor, and convert it to an immune responsive tumor. That's a hot tumor. And just a reminder, cold tumors are typically the varieties of pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, prostate, ovarian, glioblastomas, colorectal, neuroendocrine tumors, and sarcomas. They have characteristic features such as low PD-L1 expression, low tumor mutational burden, minimal or excluded CD8 cytotoxic T lymphocytes, immunosuppressed cytokine profile with TGF-beta, interleukin 10 that are immunosuppressive, dense extracellular matrix, making it difficult to penetrate, and then high levels of regulatory cells that are immunosuppressive, such as T regulating cells, M2 macrophages, N2 macrophages, and myeloid-derived suppressing cells. So let's get to this study because this study was very interesting. The objective was to assess whether or not the pulse electric field therapy can enhance the effectiveness of neoadjuvant chemoimmunotherapy. So actually, the PEF was neoadjuvant to the chemoimmunotherapy. The three therapies here, the chemotherapy was cisplatin. The immunotherapy here was anti-PD-1, programmed death 1 antibody, so it's a monoclonal antibody, and then the partial PEF ablation. So what they were doing here was trying to look at the combination of simply adding in the concept of partial ablation, PEF, to activate chemoimmunotherapy, which is a very conventional, accepted standard of care practice. Now, they did this in a very, very resistant cell model type in mice of triple negative breast cancer. So they didn't just pick the easiest of the cancer cell lines, that is a cell line from an original individual that is repetitively grown in the lab, but of a very particular resistant cell line of triple negative breast cancer. And this type was implanted into a certain type of mouse. And this type of cancer is highly metastatic and highly resistant to immunotherapy in the mice model world. Again, the combination therapy, cisplatin, chemotherapy, anti-PD-1 antibody, a monoclonal antibody, chronic, a conventional immunotherapy, and then partial, particularly here, the PEF ablation. So when I say PEF to people, a lot of people will hear PEMF. No. I'm talking about pulse electric field therapy. This is non-thermal, okay, nanopulses of high voltage energy, creating and causing irreversible electrocorporation. And what this does is basically poking holes in the cell membrane. And this leads to immunogenic tumor cell death, but yet preserving certain proteins. Now, this is important. Beyond the immunogenic cell death, which is cell death that activates the immune system, it releases damage-associated molecular patterns. And research has shown that the release of damage-associated molecular patterns actually elevates the immune response. It enhances antigen presentation. This is how locally you'll have these certain antigen presentation cells that will engulf the dead pieces of cancer cells, and then they present it to other immune cells, and that's how you create then activation of both the innate and adaptive immune systems. And this creates a local immune response, but then a distant systemic immune response. I've talked about this on another front as it relates to intratumoral immunotherapy prior to surgery, but this study in 2024 actually showing how PEF intratumorally can actually augment chemo-immunotherapy. So there were two arms to this study. There was the unresected and the resected arm, where they didn't resect the primary tumor and then where they resected the primary tumor. So here are the key findings of this simple addition of intratumoral partial PEF. Number one, it enhances immune activation. I can't keep hitting this point enough. When you look throughout history, from the initiating work of Dr. William Cawley, and then how he was ostracized through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and then the 80s, oncology started to go, the immune system's probably kind of important. I mean, the immune system, after all, that's its mechanism, is to defend the body. So it would defend it against bacteria, viruses, parasites, and fungi. It must allow it to protect against endogenous threats such as cancer. So the way they found that it can enhance the immune activation is they found increased immune cell population systemically. Not locally, systemically. Even in the presence of chemotherapy, which suppresses immune cells. See, chemotherapy targets rapidly dividing cells. The problem with chemotherapy is its off-target toxicity. Rapidly dividing cells are not confined to just cancer cells. Immune cells are rapidly dividing cells. So when you add chemotherapy in, guess what? That tends to reduce the systemic immune cell population. But here, the addition of PEF treatment prior to chemo-immunotherapy elevated systemic immune cell populations. We also found elevated cytokines levels. These are immune signals, the communication environment, the milieu that allows the immune system to be anti-tumor, but also there can be pivot on the cytokines to make it pro-tumor. So there's this constant communication battle, the immune signals, and that is through the cytokines. So there was an elevated cytokine level and population that was anti-tumor. So that was observed along with these immune signals. So it's not like we're just seeing elevation in immune cells and they weren't doing anything. It's not like they were, hey, the Army is elevated, the Marines are elevated, the numbers, we're getting great recruitment, yet they're all on coffee break. They're not trained. They're not active. It's not what we're seeing here. We're seeing them actually not only elevated in number, but activated against the threat. And here it is cancer in this mice model. Second is it increases tumor control and survival. See, the combination of the PEF, again, pulse electric field therapy, with the cisplatin and the PD-1 monoclonal antibody, it slowed the tumor growth. And this was found most importantly in the unresected. And so what they found is they allowed these mice to live, but in the arm of the unresected that received the PEF intratumorally plus the cisplatin plus the monoclonal antibody against the PD-1, they found in those mice 44% lived 52 days. But in those that did not receive the PEF, the pulse electric field therapy, but they did receive the chemotherapy, they did receive the immunotherapy, 0 of those mice lived 52 days. 44% survival at 52 days versus 0. Do PEF prior to chemo and prior to immunotherapy. Now, the PEF here was intratumorally, but the chemotherapy and the immunotherapy was systemically. Again, at the Williams Cancer Institute, we do intratumoral PEF and intratumoral chemo and intratumoral immunotherapy. So we have to understand that what we're doing at the Williams Cancer Institute is actually several steps above this, but this is a great bridge. It's a bridge that allows us to take chemotherapy and all of its adverse events and allow us to make it work better. Systemic immunotherapy, which has such a poor response rate, and allow it to work better simply by adding here intratumoral PEF. And there was also an improved survival rate associated with these mice, as evident in what we were talking about related to the survival number of days for these mice. If that's not enough, 1 and 2, we have metastatic reduction. And this is important because 90% of morbidity and mortality is associated in cancer when it spreads, when it metastasizes. Now, the problem with surgery, the problem with chemo, the problem with radiation, here we're talking about chemo, is that all 3 of these have been shown to, in some ways, increase the risk of metastasis. This has been shown in breast cancer research. Chemotherapy can shrink a primary tumor, yet lead to the mechanism by which it can spread. Got a series on podcasts, going to be talking about the unholy trinity. Check that out there. Not just focusing on the negative, focusing on the science, discussing it, then focusing on solutions. And herein lies a potential solution. Provide intratumoral PEF prior to systemic chemo-immunotherapy. It activates the immune system. And here it's going to reduce the incidence in this mouse model of pulmonary lung metastasis. Significantly, the metastasis was reduced to 0.49% in the PEF plus cisplatin plus anti-PD-1 group versus 2.5% in the untreated control group. So it's a significant reduction of risk of metastasis. And if we can reduce the risk of why 90% of morbidity and mortality exists in cancer, that's a win. That's a win. But then finally, it created immune memory. The whole idea, I think, about treatment and about remission and about no evidence of disease is not to just achieve 3 months, 6 months, a year. Those are all great. Those are all great. But it's to do so for decades. Instead of 1 year, how about 20 years? Instead of 5 years, how about 25 years of no evidence of disease? See, I believe the only way you can do that is through immune activation, through creating immune memory, through the training of the immune system. And here, by creating these immune memory cells, B cells and T cells, they're allowed to just permeate the body, supervising, looking for cells that may have broken through and are starting to recur and regroup to come back again. And in that light, those immune memory cells can activate and reactivate the immune system, almost like a, original vaccination, which is, hey, we got exposed to a virus, the immune system's activated, and then, hey, we get exposed to it again, the immune system goes, I've seen that before, and go get it. And that's exactly what we're looking to do here, is to actually say, look, there's the tumor. Destroy it. Activate the immune system and get it. Hey, we don't see any cancer. Immune memory cells are floating around the body years later. Cancer cell pops up. Immune cells come along and say, I've seen that before. Boom, targeted destruction. So that's the power here of simply adding in intratumoral ablation prior to chemo-immunotherapy systemically in a mouse model. And I'll close with this. People look at PEF as an ablative technique, as a destruction technique, as an alternative to surgery. And you see this in how cryotherapy, how histotripsy, nanoknife, how all of these are employed. They're employed to say, well, let's not surgically remove it, which is a good thing, but let's destroy it in its entirety with ablative techniques. And research has shown that when you do that, you don't get an immune response. Partial intratumoral ablative techniques create an immune response, whereas total does not. This is why the abscopal effect described under radiation has been so variable and weak and unpredictable since its first discussion or presentation in 1953 by Dr. R.H. Moll. It's because when you destroy all of the tumor and all of the antigen-presenting cells and all of the damage-associated molecular patterns and all of the antigen-presenting cells, you can't activate the innate and the adaptive immunity. But by doing partial, you take a ablative technique intratumorally and you actually make it an immunotherapy. Thank you for joining me on this hot take of PEF neoadjuvant for chemo-immunotherapy. I'll see you on the next hot take.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Prescribe Podcast. All references supporting this episode can be found on the prescribe.com website. That's pre-scribe.com. To get your next dose of medical innovation, make sure you subscribe to Prescribe. We'll see you for your next refill.